there are some things you'd rather not be right about. I've been saying ever since joining Sky that the climate cult would eventually close down Australia's heavy industry, because it stands to reason that you can't run a big factory on solar panels or intermittent battery use or solar or wind. Yet that's the inevitable result of a power system that's designed to reduce emissions rather than provide affordable, reliable 24/7 electricity. Yesterday, the head of the company that runs the giant Portland aluminium smelter in country Victoria warned that it would have to close in the absence of a long-term power contract at lower prices. The Portland smelter employs nearly 700 people directly and nearly 2,000 indirectly. It's responsible for about 20% of Australia's aluminium production, and by far it's the largest employer in the local area. The production of aluminium, of course, is highly energy intensive. It's sometimes described as congealed electricity. Yet this light metal is absolutely essential to the modern world. It's an indispensable part of any modern economy: construction industry, transport and aviation, as well as health services, to name just a few. If aluminium is no longer made here in Australia, we won't stop using it. It's just that the aluminium in the things we use will be made overseas, mostly in much dirtier smelters in countries like China, countries that use the climate cult against us but don't take it all seriously themselves. You might remember that the Portland smelter is only still in operation because of a bailout by the federal and Victorian governments back in January 2017. Daniel Andrews and Malcolm Turnbull, between them, tipped in $240 million from the taxpayer to keep the plant going after a blackout that December that caused tens of millions of dollars damage. But this money runs out in mid-2021, and its ultimate CEO said yesterday, and I quote, "The subsidy cycle is not a viable option. Not a viable option for the staff and the people down here who live on a bit of a knife edge." He's right, of course. But long-term cheap power is not a viable option either, at least while coal-fired power stations are closing down and no new gas-fired ones are starting up due to ludicrous state government bans on gas exploration and extraction. And of course, in all of this, the extraction and exploration point re gas, the Andrews government is the worst offender. Mind you, business is to blame too for pandering to the climate cult. These days, aluminium producers distinguish between clean aluminium, so-called clean aluminium, that's produced from hydropower in places like Canada, and dirty aluminium, that's produced from coal-fired power in places like Gladstone in Queensland and Tomago, near Newcastle, as well as Portland. Because the politically correct companies that operate them are looking not just to lower their costs, but also claim that they've reduced their emissions, the hydro-fired smelter at Bell Bay in Tasmania might live a little bit longer than those on the mainland. But the bottom line is that whichever way you look at it, at least 3 of our current aluminium producers are on the way out the back door, following the 2 that have already gone, Kurri Kurri and Point Henry. These aluminium producers, I hate to say, are almost certain to be followed by our steel producers as well, unless Australia can get back to being the affordable energy superpower we once were. But that means overcoming the emissions obsession that has driven energy policy in this country for the past 15 years, except for the brief moment in time when the coalition repealed the carbon tax that the people voted in a landslide to remove. As I've been saying this week, the Morrison government has had an amazing year. After facing what looked like inevitable defeat 12 months back, it's now well and truly dominant. But political dominance only lasts on the back of policy performance. It's just not enough for the government's energy policy merely to be less bad than Labor's. Australia needs an energy policy that can keep the aluminium industry and the rest of heavy industry, steel making included, viable in this country. Because if we let it go, sure, it needs jobs on the economic front, but also it will impact our defence security as well. Right now, there's plenty of good words from the government, but unless there's action, the goodwill from voters will evaporate. PM, with this latest news out of Portland, the clock is ticking.